This is a video tutorial on what are propositions, premises and conclusions. First of all, some definitions. So when we are creating an argument, what we're creating is a number of propositions which link together in a particular way. A proposition is any proposal or statement. Swans are white, eating meat is wrong, God doesn't exist. These are all propositions. They propose something, they state something. Now, an argument can have propositions of two kinds. Ones that are a premise and ones that are a conclusion. So a premise is a proposition that forms the basis of an argument or from which a conclusion is drawn. They support the conclusion. A proposition is a conclusion if it is justified by a number of premises. You wish to pause this and make sure you write these down and record them. I'd now like you to try this task. What are the premises and conclusion in the following? Pause and complete. Okay, now I'd like you to have a look at the answers here and then pause again and check your answers. Right, if we have a look at the first one, Mr. Moffat always wears black shoes to work and he'll be coming to work on Friday. In that one sentence we actually have two distinct propositions. Proposition 1, which forms premise 1, Mr. Moffat always wears black shoes to work. Premise 2, Mr. Moffat will be coming to work on Friday. These are two different propositions. What makes them a premise is that these two propositions are supporting a further proposition. Namely, Mr. Moffat will wear black shoes on Friday, and that is the conclusion. You also notice in common language, the word therefore usually denotes a conclusion. The second example, I've met 10 postmen in my life and I can tell you they each had a beard. Graham is a postman. It's clear to me that Graham has a beard. Now, we again have two premises. The first premise is that 10 postmen I have met had a beard. Second premise is Graham is a postman. And the conclusion which is drawn here is that Graham has a beard. Now, you might well have been able to identify what were the premise and what was the conclusion, but you may have thought this is a bad argument. And this is a bad argument for a number of ways. And we'll be looking at why this might be a weak argument when we look at deductive and inductive arguments. This would be an example of a weak inductive argument. The third example, Jimmy is mortal, I tell you. Look, all human beings are mortal and Jimmy's a human being. So there you have it. What's interesting about this example is it begins with the conclusion, and we often do. We often say, I think something because, and then you give your reasons. So you get the conclusion first, Jimmy is mortal. And this conclusion, this proposition, Jimmy is mortal, is justified by giving two further propositions. All human beings are mortal and Jimmy is a human being. To further clarify then, propositions are not premises or conclusions out with an argument. A proposition becomes a premise when it comes before a conclusion, when it supports a conclusion. A proposition becomes a conclusion when it comes after premises. Let's have a look at Jimmy again. Premise 1, all human beings are mortal. Premise 2, Jimmy is a human being. Conclusion, Jimmy is mortal. Now, we could swap some of these propositions round. So let's swap premise 1, all human beings are mortal, with the conclusion. Put the conclusion into where premise 1 is. So it looks like this. Premise 1, Jimmy is mortal. Premise 2, Jimmy is a human being. Conclusion, all human beings are mortal. Now you can see that they can all be switched around. It still makes sense, although it's now a very bad argument. Because of course, all human beings might not be mortal, because we don't know. We've only got one example, and that's Jimmy. Jimmy may in fact be the only human being who is mortal. Right. To end, Can you now explain what a proposition, a premise, and a conclusion are? Have a think and write down your answers. If you've got any questions, please email me.